CuppaJoeGamer, your source for laid-back and unbound video game content. Find content like this and so much more at CuppaJoeGamer.com. Alright, welcome everyone to the first audio session of After Hours. This is my bonus content kind of show where I get to focus on stuff that I normally wouldn't put all of my effort into. It's going to be much more laid back than my normal content, if that's even possible, but a little less effort and just kind of free-forming a lot. But this particular session is all about the music of the games that I've talked about so far in the past 8 months of me writing for the website. I'm pretty excited to hit this milestone, and I actually got quite a bit of content out there within those 8 months. I've talked about 14 games total so far, if you exclude the bonus articles that I did for Donkey Kong Country and Christmas Nights into Dreams over the holiday season. So I'd like to just kick back and talk about some of the music that we've heard so far in these great titles. We're going to jump right into the first two games that I talked about for the channel, and that is Liberation Maiden and Dragon Quest Wars. Both these games, they were quite different to talk about. Obviously, Liberation Maiden is like a 3D action shoot-'em-up. It's quite different from the other title that I talked about in that article. So it was definitely a huge contrast to the source material as far as going up against each other. I usually, and I've found, definitely would like to focus on games that have a little more in common with each other when it comes to talking about games in the double shot articles. But we'll see how that goes. I think it's fun to do the contrast every once in a while. So we're going to be listening to Main Menu from Liberation Maiden and Main Menu from Dragon Quest Wars. Now, in the case for Dragon Quest Wars, it's not really a original track. Most of the music that is played in Dragon Quest games kind of get repeated a lot, and Dragon Quest Wars is no different. Dragon Quest Wars is a small top-down, it's almost kind of like playing chess, but with Dragon Quest monster characters. And it's really fun. It's definitely a game that I really wish would get ported to mobile, but anyway, you can find all of my impressions of those games in my double shot article for those games. So that again, for the tracks we'll be picking, that's Main Menu from Liberation Maiden, which is a nice, very calm and ambient track, and then it'll lead into the Main Menu for Dragon Quest Wars, which is a little more upbeat and a little more childish, but both of these tracks definitely stand out as probably two of my favorite. So we'll be back after those. Alright, so that was Main Menu from Liberation Maiden by Tomonobu Kikuchi, and Main Menu from Dragon Quest Wars by the legendary composer Koichi Sugiyama, who does all the Dragon Quest music. Yeah, pretty crazy contrast right there. As you can imagine, it was very fun just writing about two completely different games for the same article. But that's what makes writing for Double Chat so much fun, because I get to kind of slap together two things into one, and it could be like a bad game in contrast to a good game, or in this case, just two good games that are completely different from each other, like Liberation Maiden and Dragon Quest Wars. Both those games are on the 3DS, and that's basically how I found out about them, was the early days of the Nintendo 3DS eShop, just getting on there for the first time and shopping and seeing what Nintendo had available on their first, not their first online shop service, that was the Wii, but the 3DS was pretty versatile as far as downloading games and having download-only games available. But anyway, moving on to the next game, which is kind of Sonic the Hedgehog rediscovery fan project, which is Freedom Planet. This came out before the big Sonic Mania, basically before 2D Sonic became a huge thing again. Thanks to Freedom Planet really showing off what fans are capable of, I believe it kind of garnered a lot of attention for Sega to think about getting fans on board for a sequel. That's completely, my opinion, but I think Freedom Planet definitely played a little bit of a part in that. It's definitely a Sonic the Hedgehog successor, as a lot of the people that worked on Freedom Planet, it originally started as a Sonic the Hedgehog fan game, much like Sonic Mania did. But in this case, they decided to make it a whole new IP, brand new characters, brand new story, completely different world, basically make their own IP out of it. So it went up on Kickstarter and got its funding. As far as I know, I believe it debuted on the Wii U console, but I'm not really sure. That's how I played it. The game is available on Nintendo Switch and other platforms now. But anyway, for this game, we'll be going into the tracks Dragon Valley Act 2, which is the first stage in Freedom Planet. And like Sonic, there's 2 acts. Each act has its own variation of a main theme going. And I really liked Dragon Valley Act 2. It was an awesome first area. It's kind of like this huge canyon that you're kind of ricocheting yourself off of with your dragon character. And we'll also be going into Fortune Knight Act 1 from Freedom Planet. So we'll play those 2 tracks, and we'll be back. right, that was Dragon Valley Act 2 and Fortune Knight Act 1 from Freedom Planet, with the contributing artists being Strife, Woofle, and Blue Warrior. Those guys are out there online. You guys can search up some of the other music that they've made, and I'd like to actually look it up after re-listening to some of this. I'd really like to look up some of their other works, because man, listening to that again, that is some great music. It really hones in on what Sonic the Hedgehog is all about with the Sega Genesis sound. Even though Freedom Planet, I would say, looks more like a Sega Saturn game, which was kind of the next step up of the Sega consoles before the Dreamcast came out. But man, just listen to those again. That is some great music. It's so clean, and Dragon Valley especially, with the kind of air guitar it has going for it, it really gets you really pepped up to just find out more about the world that you're exploring in Freedom Planet, as you play as Lilac, the purple flying dragon, and her two companions. I believe it was Mila and Carol. Carol the Wildcat, and Mila, I think, was a Basset Hound. I meant to make a whole joke about Mila being a Basset Hound, and if I ever did a video version of that review, but I guess I never really got around to it. I had some just some quirky, stupid jokes in there. But and as far as Fortune Knight, man, I love the aesthetic of that stage. It's not one of the better made levels in the game. I mentioned it in my review that I felt like a lot of the depth perception was kind of lost. You couldn't really tell what was in the foreground and what was in the background, and a lot of that stage, if a train went by, and you were just supposed to kind of expect to know that you could jump on it, that kind of thing, which none of it was like super terrible, or like the game didn't rely on you to know any of that. It was just kind of cool to know. It was a really busy stage, but the song for it, oh my gosh, I love it so much. It's kind of got like, it's really going for like a Imperial China look, just with like, everything a modern society would have, like railroads and everything, monorails, I mean, electric lighting and everything. It's a really gorgeous looking level to play through. But I just love that mix of, like, it sounds like castanets mixed with taiko drums. So, like, you're hearing that bong, 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 like, in the background. And then you hear the it's such a unique sound. I love it so much. It makes me really want to play the game again, even though I know for me, personally, it was a kind of frustrating experience. But anyway, moving on from Freedom Planet, we're going into a much wilder take on a video game, and that's Psychonauts by Double Fine. Psychonauts is a much more it doesn't really hold its roots into old video games so much, because mostly a lot of the video games that we recall as retro or whatever are from Japanese studios. Psychonauts is from a Western studio, and with Tim Schafer the lead as far as writing and dialogue goes. It's a 3D platform game, and you play as a kid at a summer camp who has psychic abilities, and everybody at the camp also has psychic abilities. They're learning how to use them there, and it's a really fun game. It makes you really nostalgic for like Saturday morning cartoons that you enjoyed watching as a kid. The music for Psychonauts is much more in the lines of like something you'd hear from a movie. It's very ambient, lots of like echoey horns and everything in the background. And Raz, the main character himself, is trying to become a psychonaut, which is like a secret agent that works for the government that uses psychic powers. So it's a really unique take on a 3D platform game. For Psychonauts, we'll be playing 3 tracks. I had a hard time picking which ones to play here, mostly because, like I said, it's very environmental, very movie soundtrack quality style. So I kind of had a hard time picking ones that would work for this necessarily, but there are some good tunes in here. So from Psychonauts, we'll be listening to Whispering Rock, campground theme that you'll hear. It really, like, if this doesn't make you think of like summers at camp, like, I don't know what will. They just completely nail the sound of like the harmonica and everything in the back guitar. It's some great stuff. Following that is Agent Crueller's Sacred Hall and Black Velvet Topia. We'll listen to those 3 tracks and I'll catch you up after this. Cool. That was Whispering Rock from Psychonauts, Agent Crueller's Sacred Hall, and Black Velvetopia, all by the very talented Peter McConnell. And like I mentioned before, if that doesn't, if the at least the first two tracks don't speak to you like, childhood memories, I don't know what does, because Whispering Rock really nails the whole summer camp feel, and Agent Crueller's Sacred Hall really, I'm a child, so really a lot of the times I think of movies that are, children's movies, but I always picture, some war veteran giving some kid the business, talking about, the good old days and what it's going to take and what the stakes are at here, and kind of prepping him for the, maybe putting a little medal on his chest or whatever to give him some pep. Yeah, that was all from Psychonauts. A really great game. I mentioned the humor a little bit, but Tim Schafer really nails this game. It is so funny to play through. It is a really funny game. And one of my favorite things in the game was the opening stage, where you invade the mind of, what was his name? Coach Oleander, who is a war veteran. And you go into his twisted mind of like airplanes crashing and everything, bullets flying. And in the midst of this is this kid that just won't shut up about his dog. And one of the first things that you can do in this game is you activate the dialogue, and he just will keep talking to you about the dog. And just, every sentence ends with it, and then he blah, blah, blah. In this airplane, you can like just break the door open and he'll fly out. It's a completely, like, it's not even something that you, like, necessarily think is going to be there, but you know you have to jump out the window, and you break it open and he flies out while speaking. It's so funny. Moving on, we're going to be taking a look at my second double shot article, which was about Ika-chan and Kamiko, two pixel art games that are just really stunning to look at and have some great chiptune music to play through. So for Ika-chan, we'll be listening to Bariki, also known as Ika-chan's theme, and for Kamiko, we'll be listening to Forest of Awakening. We'll be back after those two tracks. Okay, so that was Ika-chan's theme by Studio Pixel, also known as Daisuke Amaya, and Forest of Awakening by Misaka for Kamiko. We are at the halfway mark, guys, so that's 10 songs so far, another 10 to go. The next few should be a little easier to talk about, so I won't have to explain so much, but Kamiko is a great little over-the-top game. You can imagine if Zelda was a much more arcadey kind of game. You can beat both Kamiko and Ika-chan in probably the span of an afternoon each. I'd say your first time through Kamiko would probably take about 2 hours, I'd say, but a little under that. Meanwhile, Ika-chan, by the same creator as Cave Story, this was definitely a Groundworks title for Pixel, and it's a great little game. It looks awesome on 3DS. It has like these nice little 3D bubble effects as you swim around as a little squid guy. Both games I've talked about, again, and in a double shot article, so you can check out what those are all about, but their soundtracks are great. Moving on, we're talking about a much more revered title, and that is Chrono Cross. This was a huge undertaking. I played through Chrono Cross pretty late in my life. I was a fan of the first game in the series, Chrono Trigger, for a pretty long time before I even got a chance to touch Chrono Cross. But I love the Chrono Cross soundtrack, and I had been listening to it for a very long time before I even played it. So we'll be listening to 2 tracks from Chrono Cross, and the thing is about Chrono Cross, it's like endlessly, it is a very widely known soundtracks. So I really didn't want to pick tracks that everybody has talked about before. The soundtrack is phenomenal. It's one of the best sounding music out there, period, in my honest opinion. It stands among some of the best as far as instrumentation and just flow of it. Chrono Cross is a phenomenal game. If you don't know much about it, it's very, very different from any Japanese role-playing game you can play out there. It's got a very unique battle system, and even though it's a sequel to, in my opinion, the greatest RPG ever made as far as battle systems and how it plays out, it's just a very streamlined, perfect experience. Chrono Cross plays it, it doesn't play it safe in any way. It basically throws everything about the first game out the window and goes for something completely different. And it still is so unique. You can't find anything out there that plays like Chrono Cross, I guarantee you. We'll be playing Leaving the Body and Voyage Another World. These are two tracks that I don't feel like get talked about a whole lot, but it kind of shows off the two contrasting feelings that Chrono Cross sends out, and that's, the very melancholy existentialism and the kind of calm, nice, cool guitar that you hear as you travel across the ocean in Chrono Cross. So we'll be back after these two tracks. gosh, it's so pleasant. These, you hear the sliding of the guitar strings. That was all a very new experience for video game players back in the day when Chrono Cross came out in 1999 or in the US 2000, as CD quality music was making its headway into the gaming spectrum. So that was a big deal when you heard, little small details like the guitar strings, and you can just see the guy sitting there on the guitar, just playing away, drifting us off into some forbidden ocean. Anyway, enough of the sentimentalities. Chrono Cross was an amazing game. It's not for everybody, but it is definitely a unique experience. So if you like trying out games that are just different, and especially if you're an RPG fan and you're just looking for something to shake things up, please give Chrono Cross a try. I cannot recommend it enough. Our next game is Valkyria Chronicles. This was a really fun game to review. It took me, honestly, forever for me to review Valkyria Chronicles, unfortunately. It's just one of those games where I didn't want to write about it until I was finished playing it. And right towards probably like the back half of the game, I was having a really hard time with it, just because its difficulty kind of kept getting higher and higher, and my skills as a player may or may not have been increasing at all during my playthrough, but I had a lot of fun playing Valkyria Chronicles. It felt like a huge throwback to games that I already knew I liked, like Skies of Arcadia, and it was just a really overall fun experience playing a game that's basically like what would happen if what would happen if World War II was like run through like an anime, with mystic powers and just down-to-earth characters. It's a very, very fun game. So from Valkyria Chronicles, we'll be listening to The Field, which is a very, it's one of the first songs you hear when you start battles in that game. Gallant Fight, and Beautiful Gallia. In the case of Beautiful Gallia, I had a really hard time not wanting this to be the song that closed out the show, but I kind of wanted something that was a little more robust. But man, Beautiful Gallia is just one of the most beautiful, just like the name suggests. It's a beautiful piano rendition. These are all really fine tracks, and I really hope you like it. So again, from Valkyria Chronicles, this is The Field, Gallant Fight, and Beautiful Gallia. And I'll catch you right after this. Some good stuff right there. I was looking up Hitoshi Sakamoto, and if his music sounds familiar to you from Valkyria Chronicles, you may have heard his other works in games like Final Fantasy XII, Final Fantasy Tactics, and the Ogre Battle series. I knew that stuff sounded familiar, and boy, does the Gallant Fight, the second track there, especially, definitely feels like something you'd hear out in the desert fields in Final Fantasy XII. So that's some great stuff right there. Again, Valkyria Chronicles was a really fun game to write about, but sometimes I just hit this feeling where I haven't played a game long enough to fully develop an opinion about it. So Valkyria Chronicles took a long time for me to finish because I wanted to finish the entirety of the game. And it was worth it. It was really tough, but I walked away really loving it. But the music was by Hitoshi Sakamoto and Daisuke Kawaguchi. I tried looking up Daisuke Kawaguchi, and I really couldn't find much as far as video games soundtracks go. It seems like he's done a couple collaborations with J-pop bands, but I really wasn't seeing much in the video game soundtracks. So he's definitely on the credits. I would just like to see and I'm pretty curious to see if he's done anything else in the video game spectrum. But Valkyria Chronicles was kind of a landmark for me as it sparked the first video review companion piece for the written reviews. I always, pictured CuppaJoeGamer to be a video, like a YouTube show kind of thing, and through lots of life stuff going on and lack of proper equipment, I just haven't been able to get to that point. So the website was just me basically saying I need to get myself out there sooner than later, so I'm just going to start writing reviews. But when I was doing Valkyria Chronicles, just kind of last second, I decided, I've been recording all this footage for screenshots and everything, I might as well try to see if I can do at least a 2-minute review video or synopsis, just to kind of get myself out there and really show what the game looks like in motion. So it was kind of slapped together for Valkyria Chronicles, but I'm glad I started doing it, because now it's what I look forward to the most when it comes to written reviews is getting that video out there. The next review I talked about, next game I talked about was Stick It to the Man, which is a point-and-click / platform game. I really wasn't too much on it. I really loved the soundtrack and the graphic style. It's just kind of a really weird character design and interesting, but I can't say I liked the game that much. So I'm going to be mixing Stick It to the Man with the next reviews, which was a double shot. The double shot review was for Gorogoa, which is another point-and-click adventure game, and a puzzle game called Color Zen. Now I'm excluding Color Zen because it just, honestly, a lot of the music just didn't speak to me at all. It's very, it's kind of like psychedelic stuff. It's supposed to play in the background while you do all this puzzle work, and honestly, I can't say I was much on it. Now, I'm not saying I don't want to highlight it in the future, but, the music is out there for you guys to listen to, but I really couldn't picture myself mixing it with anything that was a part of the show. Which is strange because a lot of the show so far has been pretty darn varied. So I really didn't like to cut it, but honestly, I couldn't see myself putting it in the show. And honestly, the song that I picked for Gorogoa, I really liked Gorogoa. The game was great. But again, it's kind of like the soundtrack isn't really meant to be something that you listen to as I'm going to listen to music now. The soundtrack to Gorogoa is very environmental, and the one song I picked is the closest thing to a real song I could really find in the soundtrack. So for Stick It to the Man, we'll be listening to The Fugitive and Chased. And from Gorogoa, we'll be listening to Pilgrimage. Now, these are going to be some serious contrast here, guys, between Stick It to the Man and Gorogoa. Stick It to the Man is very jazzy, very brass. I'd imagine you'd hear it from some kind of noir comedy. And Gorogoa, again, is very distant, echoey sound. So I apologize for slapping these two together, but that's just how everything lined up chronologically, was these two games back to back. So again, that's Fugitive and Chased from Stick It to the Man, and Pilgrimage from Gorogoa. And we'll be back. Yes, so that was The Fugitive and Chased by Stick to the Man and Pilgrimage from Gorogoa. Joel Billy did the music for Stick to the Man, and Joel Korolitz. I'm just realizing they're both first name Joel. I found that very interesting because we're going to be running into that scenario in our next two tracks. But yeah, two of the same first names. And I apologize. I know that's a crazy, crazy contrast between the weird jazz of Stick to the Man and the ambient quietness of Gorogoa. In fact, in Pilgrimage from Gorogoa, I actually had to like fast forward quite a bit to get to like any really bits of music, and it's not something that is a knock on the soundtrack by any means, but just to fit the format of the show, I needed to jump ahead a bit in the track to kind of give a feel of the actual instrumentation of it. Closing out the show, we're going to be looking at two tracks from the last review I did up until March of this year, 2020, and that is Sayonara Wild Hearts. Sayonara Wild Hearts is a pop album video game, so like in fact the entirety of the music is built like a album. So you'll be hearing some great music to close out this episode with Sayonara Wild Hearts. The music is by Daniel Olson, Jonathan Eng, and Linnea Olson, which both of these Olsons are spelled differently. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing them correctly, but yeah, they're almost spelled exactly the same. But yeah, so we'll go into these two tracks. That's Doki Doki Rush and Mine from Sayonara Wild Hearts. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of After Hours, guys. If you want to find more content like this, you can find everything at CuppaJoeGamer.com. It's spelled exactly how you would say it. So yeah, look me up. And if you like content like this, please leave a comment. I will read it. I always love reading comments. Spread the news around about the show and about what I do. I'm not really quite out there yet, so any notoriety you guys can give me is very helpful. All right, so thank you so much for listening again, and I'll catch you guys later.